Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt disgust, not because of them, but because something about their very existence seems to offend your soul? It might be their arrogance, their laziness, their selfishness, their neediness, their cruelty. Whatever it is, something deep in you recoils. Something flinches. You don't just dislike them, you hate them. But what if I told you that what you hate the most in others is a mirror, not of them, but of yourself? What if the qualities that most enrage you are precisely the ones buried inside you, waiting for acknowledgement? The anger you feel, that righteous heat that boils beneath your skin, it might not be a response to injustice. It might be the scream of your shadow self, the parts of you you've spent your whole life burying alive. You wake up every morning with a mask on, a mask of kindness, of control, of moral superiority. But deep beneath it, something feral snarls in the dark. And every time you condemn another person, every time you think, I would never be like them, that part inside you whispers, but you already are, because you are what you hate. You are the arrogance you mock. You are the laziness you criticize. You are the selfishness you punish. You are the cruelty you pretend to rise above. Not because you act on it, but because it lives in you, unacknowledged, unloved, and unbearably alive. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." But we rarely ask, why do we gaze into the abyss in the first place? Is it curiosity? Is it fear? Or is it a secret longing to see the truth of who we really are? We're drawn to what we hate like moths to a flame. We poke it, analyze it, gossip about it, scream at it on the news, point fingers at it in public, but we never turn inward. Because turning inward would mean admitting that the war is not out there. The battlefield is internal. You hate the manipulative, but only because you've learned to manipulate in silence. You hate the weak because you fear your own fragility. You hate the loud, the proud, the vulgar, because you've killed those impulses in yourself to appear civilized. And so, like a snake eating its own tail, your hatred loops back to yourself. But you're not aware of it, because society has taught you to project, to exile the unacceptable parts of yourself by pinning them onto others. So you banish your own lust by shaming the promiscuous. You repress your rage by mocking the aggressive. You suffocate your envy by despising the successful. And all the while, you tell yourself, I'm not like them. I'm better. I'm right. But are you? Or have you simply become a master of repression, hiding the unacceptable truths of your own psyche behind polished mirrors of morality? Here lies the paradox Nietzsche whispers through the veil of time. The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently. What if your hatred is not a mark of clarity, but a wound, a scar of some internal fracture between who you are and who you're allowed to be? Who told you it was dangerous to be selfish? Who convinced you that your anger must be buried? Who taught you to hate the things in others you were never permitted to express in yourself? The child you were once understood. They screamed when angry. They demanded attention. They acted selfishly. They were raw, real, unfiltered. And then they were punished, shamed, corrected, not because they were evil, but because they were human in ways that made others uncomfortable. So you learned to hide your chaos. You made yourself smaller. You internalized the rules. You became good. But the cost of being good was killing parts of yourself. And now, every time you see someone being what you've buried, you feel hate. Not because they are bad, but because you were never allowed to be like them. What if your hatred isn't moral outrage, but unconscious mourning? What if every person you despise is a rejected version of yourself, walking free? And if that's true, what does it mean about you? If you are what you hate, then what are you becoming every time you look away? Let that question burn, because what comes next might unravel everything you think you know about morality, identity, and the fragile illusion of self. You feel the heat of your hatred, but you don't understand its source. It emerges like a phantom, uninvited, irrational, and uncontrollable. You lash out, or you suppress. You justify, or you intellectualize. But rarely do you stop to ask, why does this bother me so much? Here lies the ancient lie buried beneath centuries of self-deception. You think you are a unified being, that what you believe, how you behave, and who you are all aligned. But they're not. You are fragmented, split between the mask you wear and the truths you dare not face. Carl Jung called this hidden self the shadow, not because it is evil, but because it is hidden in the darkness of your psyche. The shadow contains everything you refuse to acknowledge in yourself: the shameful, the chaotic, the raw, the wild, the unacceptable. Not just your cruelty or greed, but also your passion, your hunger, your vulnerability, your forgotten power. The tragedy? You didn't choose to bury these parts. You were trained to, conditioned by parents, teachers, religion, society, taught to amputate anything that didn't fit the mold. So, piece by piece, you dismembered your soul and called it growing up. You learned that anger was dangerous, so you became agreeable. You learned that pride was arrogance, so you downplayed your worth. You learned that desire was dirty, so you feigned indifference. But repression does not destroy, it displaces. What is denied inwardly is projected outwardly. What you cannot accept in yourself, you attack in others. And here the seeds of hatred are sown, not in truth, but in trauma, in the fractures between who you are and who you were told to be. Nietzsche saw this with prophetic clarity. He warned of ressentiment, a deep, festering resentment that arises when we are too weak or afraid to claim our desires, so we demonize them in others. The coward calls the brave reckless. The timid call the confident arrogant. The repressed call the free immoral. But make no mistake, this isn't a conscious decision. It's a psychological survival strategy. You cannot hate yourself outright, so you cast your hatred onto a proxy. You externalize the battle. It's not you who is prideful, it's the influencer. It's not you who is shallow, it's your coworker. It's not you who is manipulative, it's your ex. Every enemy you make becomes a stand-in for your denied self, and you never realize you're fighting your own reflection because it hurts too much to face what you've exiled. Jung called this projection the moral problem of our age. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but most never take the path inward. Why? Because introspection isn't painless. It's not a peaceful meditation on a mountaintop. It's a descent into hell, a confrontation with all that's been buried beneath the surface. And Nietzsche? He didn't ask us to simply understand this darkness. He demanded we embrace it. To become who you are, he said, you must first confront what you are not and what you've been pretending to be. He wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. But you were taught to fear your chaos. You were told to be nice, to fit in, to be moral, to be predictable. And so, your dancing star dimmed while your resentment grew. You cannot repress forever without cost. The more you deny your darkness, the more it controls you. It leaks through your judgments. It disguises itself as virtue. It poisons your relationships. It transforms your righteousness into a quiet form of tyranny. And you don't even see it happening, because the shadow wears your voice. It mimics your reasoning. It uses your wounds as justification. But deep down you feel it. You feel the tension of living half alive. You feel the gnawing hunger of a self that's only partially expressed. You feel the fatigue of pretending to be good when something wild in you wants to scream. And so, your hatred grows, not just toward individuals, but toward entire types of people, toward ideologies, toward ways of life that you secretly long for but cannot admit. You become cynical, judgmental, dogmatic, not because you're evil, but because you're fragmented. Your soul has been split by expectation, and your hatred is the smoke rising from the fire of your divided self. This is not just a psychological problem, it is a philosophical one. Nietzsche saw Christianity, for instance, not only as a religion, but as a massive cultural repression machine. He believed it taught people to suppress their instincts, to worship meekness, to glorify suffering, and to label strength as sin. He wasn't merely critiquing faith. He was warning about the psychological danger of moral frameworks that deny the full spectrum of the human experience. He believed that when we are told to cut off our instincts and desires, to amputate everything primal, we do not become spiritual. We become bitter. Our morality becomes a mask for resentment. This is the danger of any belief system that demands you repress what is natural, vital, or true within you. And so, you learn to hate the world that lives. You hate the bold, the sensual, the powerful, the free, because deep down, they remind you of what you could have been if you hadn't been told to feel shame. And so you hate. You hate in secret. You hate with pride. You hate with what you believe is righteousness. But it's not righteousness. It's disowned desire. It's the ache of your buried truth begging to be seen. The question is not, how do I stop hating others? The real question is, what part of me have I killed that still lives in them? And until you are willing to resurrect that part, to invite your shadow home, you will keep waging war on the world. A war that is, and has always been, against yourself. But what does this war do to you? What happens to your soul when it is lived through projections, powered by repressed instincts, and built on unconscious hate? What is the cost of never facing your own darkness? That is what we must uncover next. You think you've escaped it. The darkness, the impulse, the version of yourself that once scared the people around you, and eventually scared you. You've grown up, matured, made progress. You've created a life with boundaries, habits, polite smiles, social approval, and the comfort of being better than that. But something isn't right. You're not at peace. You're not free. And in your quietest moments, you feel a strange pressure, like something is pressing against the inside of your chest. That's not stress. That's the soul knocking. Because the shadow you buried didn't vanish. It evolved. It dressed itself in logic. It crept into your sarcasm. It whispered in your complaints, disguised in the voice of reason. It entered your politics, your parenting, your preferences. It became a ghost embedded in your perception. And now, it shapes the world you see. You walk through life not as an open presence, but as a reaction. You interpret every situation through the lens of your wounds. You no longer meet people. You meet projections. You don't see them. You see the parts of you you've disowned. That coworker you can't stand, he's just too loud, too selfish, too confident. No, he's not the problem. It's the you that wasn't allowed to take up space. The you who learned to survive by staying quiet. The you that died so early, you can barely remember her name. And now, every time you see someone being what you weren't allowed to be, it hurts. And when pain goes unexamined, it turns into hate. Not the dramatic kind, not the headline-making hate, but the quiet, socially acceptable kind. The kind that gets mistaken for intelligence, moral superiority, or taste. You become more critical, more judgmental, more discerning. But behind it all is fear. Fear that your mask might slip, that your hunger might show, that someone might catch a glimpse of the parts of you you've worked so hard to kill. And so you judge, you mock, you reject, but you don't see the cost. You've severed yourself from your own power. You've cut yourself off from raw joy, untamed creativity, unapologetic love. You've spent so much time avoiding your shadow that you forgot it contains everything you need to feel alive. Every time you suppress your anger, your energy dims. Every time you disown your lust, your passion dies. Every time you shame your selfishness, you lose the ability to protect yourself. This is the hidden damage of repression. You don't just lose your darkness, you lose your vitality. And it doesn't stop with you. When you live in projection, you infect your relationships. You sabotage intimacy, because being fully seen would require exposing your hidden self. You pass your shadow onto your children, punishing in them what you never resolved in you. You choose friends and lovers who mirror your disowned traits, only to hate them for it later. And when society rewards your repression with approval, you go deeper. You become successful, productive, respected, but underneath the surface, you are hollow. And that hollowness spreads. Collectively, we see it every day. We elect leaders who mirror our collective shadow, loud, angry, reactive. We build online spaces where projection becomes performance. We make enemies of ideas instead of interrogating the wounds that fear them. Our culture becomes a battleground of ghosts, everyone fighting each other, no one realizing they're fighting themselves. And in this chaos, the most dangerous thing happens. The ego grows. Because repression and ego are lovers in disguise. The more you suppress, the more the ego inflates to protect your self-image. You become addicted to being right, to being virtuous, to being good. But it's not real virtue. It's armor. Armor built to keep the shadow at bay. But armor turns you rigid, paranoid, afraid to feel, afraid to fall, afraid to be wrong, vulnerable, or human. Nietzsche called this the slave morality, the value system of the oppressed soul. He warned that when we build our morals out of resentment, they become chains, not ethics. We begin to worship weakness. We glorify suffering. We fear strength. We attack those who own what we repress. And we call it justice. But it's not justice. It's projection institutionalized. The world becomes a theater of displaced shadows. And as this collective denial deepens, we become strangers to ourselves. We suffer depression not from lack of pleasure, but from the absence of integration. We feel anxiety not just from stress, but from the internal war between our persona and our truth. We burn out, not from doing too much, but from doing everything without wholeness. And worst of all, we begin to believe this is normal, that numbness is peace, that emptiness is adulthood, that hatred is wisdom, that conformity is character. But somewhere inside you, a part of you knows. It knows that the more you suppress, the more life becomes a filtered echo, that the more you judge, the less you feel, that the more you hate, the more you disappear. Because here is the final consequence. You become what you hate, not just in projection, but in being. The more you obsess over the flaws in others, the more those same flaws take root in you. Because attention feeds identity. If you constantly focus on the cowardice of others, you build your life around proving your own bravery, which quickly devolves into self-righteousness. If you judge others for being selfish, you bury your needs until you either explode in passive aggression or martyrdom. If you condemn others for their pride, you become addicted to humility and turn yourself into a doormat. The shadow always wins, not because it's evil, but because it's true. You can ignore it. You can judge it. You can bury it under books, virtue, rituals, activism, or spiritual bypassing, but it's still there. And the more you resist it, the more it rules you from behind the curtain. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you've become everything you claim to hate, not because you are a hypocrite, but because you are human. And now, you have a choice. Keep playing the game of repression, keep polishing your mask, keep projecting your wounds, or begin the rebellion. The dangerous, liberating, and entirely necessary rebellion that calls you to face your shadow and take your soul back. You don't need more advice. You don't need more therapy lingo. You don't need another podcast telling you to be kind to yourself. You need a reckoning, because this isn't a mindset problem. It's not a productivity hack. It's not something you journal about once and move on. This is war, a civil war of the soul between the person you've been pretending to be and the one you buried long ago. But here's the truth. You will never be whole until you face the part of you that terrifies you most. The rebellion begins with a question most people will spend their whole lives avoiding. What do I secretly envy about the people I despise? That influencer you call shallow, do you envy their freedom to be seen? That arrogant boss, do you long for their unapologetic self-worth? That selfish friend, do you resent their ability to say no without guilt? If you look deeply, honestly, and without flinching, you'll find that most of your hate is just longing in a mask, longing for permission, longing to express the full palette of your being, longing to stop playing dead in the name of goodness. This is the rebellion Nietzsche spoke of, not a rebellion of politics or power, but a rebellion of self-creation. Become who you are, he wrote, but that doesn't mean become who you think you are. It means tear down the illusions, face the parts of you you've kept in exile, and build yourself again, not from repression, but from integration. This isn't soft work. This isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. Carl Jung warned that the shadow doesn't disappear by ignoring it. It only becomes more dangerous. To reclaim your life, you must walk into the darkness willingly. So how do you begin? Step 1. Stop moralizing your emotions. Your anger is not evil. Your jealousy is not sin. Your pride is not toxic. They are signals, flashing lights on the dashboard of your soul. Your job is not to shut them off. Your job is to listen. What is your anger trying to protect? What is your envy trying to teach you about your unmet desires? What is your pride trying to restore after decades of shame? You must learn to feel without flinching, feel rage without turning it into cruelty, feel desire without cloaking it in shame, feel power without fearing that it will corrupt you. Because it's not your feelings that destroy you, it's your refusal to face them. Step 2. Make contact with your inner outlaw, the part of you that doesn't follow the rules, the one you silenced to be loved, the one who was punished for being loud, wild, impulsive, angry, sexual, messy. That self is not your enemy. It's your original form. And until you make peace with that wildness, until you let it breathe, you will live a life of quiet resentment. So go inward. Write letters from that self. Give it a name. Ask it what it needs. Let it scream if it has to. Rebellion begins in intimacy, with the parts of yourself you were told not to touch. Step 3. Practice radical, terrifying honesty. No more spiritual bypassing. No more pretending to be above it. No more burying your instincts in the language of virtue. Tell the truth. Admit you want power. Admit you want to be seen. Admit you want to be desired, admired, respected, not just loved. Admit that you're tired of being good. Because the longer you lie to yourself, the longer your shadow will write your story from behind the scenes. Step 4. Break the mask out loud. You don't grow in silence. You grow by breaking character. Say the thing you were never allowed to say. Set the boundary you've been afraid to draw. Let someone see you ugly, raw, unfiltered. Yes, it will feel like death, because for the ego, it is. But on the other side of that death is a new kind of life. One that doesn't depend on approval. One that doesn't fear the judgment of others. One that feels real. This is not self-improvement. This is resurrection. And you won't do it perfectly. You'll stumble. You'll overcorrect. You'll unleash things you don't know how to hold yet. But keep going. Because the world does not need more polite people playing small. It needs people who have stared into the abyss of their own being and come back bearing truth. Step 5. Create. Not for success, not for likes, not for validation. Create to release what the shadow has carried for years. Paint your rage, write your shame, dance your grief, scream your ecstasy into a microphone if you have to. Because repression cannot survive expression. And if you can turn your darkness into art, you no longer need to destroy yourself or others with it. You alchemize it. You become dangerous in the best way, not because you harm, but because you refuse to hide. And this, perhaps, is Nietzsche's ultimate rebellion. Not to destroy morality, but to create a new morality, rooted in self-integration, not self-denial. A morality born from honesty, not fear. From fullness, not obedience. From power, not pretense. To be truly moral is not to suppress the shadow. It is to know it so deeply that you no longer act from it unconsciously. That's where the real rebellion lives. Not in rage, not in anarchy, but in self-possession. When you are no longer at war with yourself, the world loses its power over you. You are not afraid of judgment, because you've judged yourself and survived. You are not afraid of failure, because you've failed your false self and been reborn. You are not afraid of others, because you've faced the most terrifying person you'll ever meet. You. And now, something miraculous happens. You stop needing enemies, because you no longer project your inner battle onto the outer world. You no longer see threats where there are only mirrors. You no longer fight shadows. You see clearly. But what do you see? What's left after the masks are gone? After the hate has dissolved? After the fire of rebellion has burned away your old identity? Only then can you face the final revelation, and it will undo you, but it will also set you free. So here you are. The war within is no longer a secret. The projection is no longer invisible. The shadow has a name, a face, a voice. And for the first time, you've stopped running. But now, the silence is terrifying, because when the dust settles, when the mask drops, when the rebellion ends, you're left staring into something deeper than hate, something more haunting than fear. You, not the curated you, not the good citizen, not the well-adjusted adult, but the ancient, aching, raw self underneath it all. The one who remembers every compromise, every betrayal, every time you swallowed your truth to be loved. And now that you've disarmed your projections and opened the doors to the inner wilderness, you finally see the truth. You were never really angry at them. You were angry that they got to be free when you didn't. You were never disgusted by their selfishness. You were haunted by the memory of your own neglected needs. You weren't judging them. You were grieving for you. Grieving for the parts of yourself that were denied permission to live. Grief, that's the real root. And it's quieter than hate, heavier than anger. It doesn't scream. It sighs. It shows you the life you could have had if you had loved all of yourself sooner. But this is where the gift reveals itself. Not in the pain, but in what the pain made possible. Awakening. Because when the illusion of who you are falls apart, something beautiful happens. You realize you are not a fixed identity. You are not a collection of traits, habits, traumas, or even choices. You are not a persona to be perfected. You are not the sum of what others see. You are a field of possibility, a being that contains cruelty and kindness, rage and joy, selfishness and sacrifice, a paradox in motion, a living contradiction. And suddenly, the things you hated become softer. You no longer need to punish arrogance, because you've made peace with your need to be seen. You no longer feel threatened by dominance, because you've found your own voice. You no longer ridicule vanity, because you've allowed your own beauty to matter. The world becomes less irritating, less offensive, less wrong. Not because it changed, but because you did. This is the final truth Nietzsche pointed to again and again, but few dared to grasp it. There are no moral phenomena at all, but only a moral interpretation of phenomena. The world isn't good or bad. People aren't light or dark. It's all a mirror. And every time you hated someone, you were looking away from something within. But now you look, and in that gaze, something incredible emerges. Compassion, not pity, not virtue signaling, not superiority wrapped in concern, but true compassion, the kind born from recognition. You see others with new eyes. You see the teenager acting out and remember your own silenced rage. You see the narcissist and recall the time you were desperate to feel important. You see the addict and feel the ache of your own attempts to numb. You see the human beneath the behavior, because now you see it in yourself. And this is liberation, not the false freedom of moral high ground, not the shallow peace of being the better person, but the deep, unshakable wholeness of self-ownership. You are no longer afraid of your shadow. So you no longer live in fear of the world. You stop performing, stop apologizing, stop managing your existence. You begin to express, to embody, to be. And in this state, strange, new, unfamiliar, you realize something breathtaking. You are not what you hate. You are not what you love either. You are what you accept. You are what you are willing to hold in your hands without shame. You are what you allow to exist without explanation. And in that space, wide, silent, sacred, you are finally whole. Not perfect, not healed, not enlightened, just whole. You laugh louder. You cry more freely. You lose arguments without losing yourself. You say no without guilt. You say yes without fear. Because nothing owns you anymore. Not your persona, not your projections, not your hate. You are no longer a reaction. You are a presence. This is the ultimate victory, not over others, but over illusion. Not over weakness, but over self-deception. And it changes everything. The world becomes bearable, not because it's kinder, but because you've stopped needing it to reflect a lie. You walk through life not looking for enemies, but for echoes, not seeking validation, but resonance. You start loving strange things, the sound of your own laugh, the awkwardness of saying the wrong thing, the beauty in people you used to despise. You start forgiving the past, not to be noble, but because it's too heavy to carry now that you're free. And one morning, you'll wake up, look in the mirror, and see someone you no longer need to escape from. Because you'll finally understand. All this time, you weren't running from others. You were running from the unlived life inside you. And now, there's nowhere left to run, only forward, into the vast, terrifying, gorgeous truth of who you are, shadow and all.